Running Sentences presents the Hapless Nomadic Cook. Episode 3. Heading Out. Grubba has been given a mission to head out for a nearby tribe, or a tribe that should be nearby, but hasn't been heard from in a while. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, events, and incidences are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual people, living, dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. It should also be noted that this is not meant to be a realistic portrayal of old nomadic times. It is merely a fictional story meant to bring humor and look at why things, or how things, might have been. Copyright 2021, Michael Honoré. All rights reserved. Grubba ducked his way into the hut that Mugga called home. It was a rather more spacious one than the one that he could call home. It was very much more busy. Mugga's wife and children seemed to be running just about everywhere at once, his children doing most of the running and his wife doing most of the chasing. Doing his best to follow the tribal leader, Grubba went over to a quiet spot near the wall that had some hay on the ground. The two of them sat down. Grubba, I have a special job for you. I need for a food person to help our tradesmen, the guy who trades with other tribes, to help our tradesmen arms to go to a nearby tribe. That sounds like a job for one of the hunters, or, does arms need protection, or, Well, we will have a party of 4 going, yes. And we'll have someone who guards you, yes. I wanted you to go because you know food, you're now our cook, and you've seen food and you know other food items. So it makes sense for you to go and see what they have, and maybe trade some of our rocks and see if they want them. The salt? That's what we decided to call it, right? Maybe we will call it that, Grubba. I rather like rocks, so. Anyway, you're going on this job if you want out of the cookhouse, if you want to stop being a cook. A child darted between them, followed by another, and their mother trying to stop them. Grubba took this second to think, and figuring that he didn't have a choice, and slowly got up from the ground. Who is coming with me, aside from Arms? Bounce is, since you two seem to get along since you came to the tribe. It's the first time for everything, I guess. I also think Sticker will be your guard, and, Arms, Bounce, you, Sticker. Yeah, that's 4. Now, you have until sunrise tomorrow before you must set off. Good luck. Grubba nodded and headed out, doing his best to dodge the running little ones and their mother along the way. He came out into the evening air, a smaller crowd still around the election fire pit and a few people still fighting over the mushroom. He took a look around to see what was what and where the other tribe members might be. The evening light, which was dark and had a bit of a crescent thing sitting in the sky, offering some light to let him look about. But he could not find either Bounce, Sticker, or Arms, and found himself prodding down the hill in search of his new companions. In the early morning of the next day, Grubba found himself at the cook hut, looking over the supplies that Arms had grabbed and put into 2 baskets he'd have, then lifting them up easily and heading out towards their meeting point. Grubba looked at his own basket, which was much smaller than Arms, as he picked that up and went back a few feet to catch his balance. Once he had done that, then he began the slow trot after Arms, still wondering why so many people were needed for a job to trade goods. At the edge of town, they met up with Bounce and Sticker, who looked ready to go. Bounce had her own basket of goods, while Sticker seemed to be carrying a variety of lengths of pointy sticks. He did have a small basket attached to his back via a string of leaves that were tied to it. Without speaking, Sticker pointed off towards where they were going, then took the lead as they headed out. The journey from town took up much of the day as they hiked through the woods and into the hills. Things were taking a while because even though Arms had good arms, the baskets were all still very heavy and laden with stuff. Grubba struggled to keep up with his basket, and now that they were conquering hills which went up and down, while increasing in size, it was getting to him. Exhaustion was setting in, and it didn't feel like they'd gone very far. But they also couldn't see the village, so Grubba was guessing that they were at least a distance away. They stopped for a few seconds so that each could catch themselves and relax for a second, but Sticker was never one to relax too much. Enough rest, we move. The rest that they had at the top of one large hill became unsettled as they got up, picking up their baskets to head down the sloped hill, which Grubba, already tired from the journey, decided to see if he could slide down it, instead of the usual slow, downward trek. With his basket firmly in his hands, he sat down and held on as the slide began on the not-so-wet grass. He made it a decent way down before doing his best to jump to his feet and run. By the time he reached the bottom of the hill, he looked up to see the stares of his companions, who then began the slow walk downward. Grubba sat down and waited as he rubbed his butt in pain. Then, when they joined him down there, they all slowly continued their journey up to the next hill. After a while, and having gotten over the last few hills, they found themselves in a rather flat section of land, which made the walk a little easier as the sun went from the high position in the sky towards the line which made it disappear from view. They'd come to a stop for the day, with the three carrying goods having collapsed when Sticker stopped them, and with what little energy the three had, they ate some food that they brought in Bounce's basket. The trio were soon asleep, with Sticker working as watchman. Their journey had already started up again in the early morning, with Grubba having had the last watch, and had the job of waking them all up when the sky began to brighten early, pushing them over, and then pushing them further, in several circles, until they had woken up. Once they were up, it was a quick grab of small food, before heading off once again. The plains soon came to an end, to a marshy land that gave way to swamps, that they were trudging through as best they could, with the water and mud coming waist-high at times. There were plenty of odd noises, and even a growling hiss every now and then that kept them company, and kept them on their toes as they looked out for animals and creatures that didn't seem to be happy with them. But nothing came of that, as they safely crossed the area of swamp and marshy lands. Once out of the swamps, however, they found themselves back in hills that rolled up and down repeatedly, until it flattened out a bit more by a seaside. There, on top of one last hill, they looked down upon it at an established camp. There was no activity down at this settlement below. They all looked on cautiously, waiting for some signs of life or that things were okay, but nothing seemed to be occurring down below. We go as a group slowly down the hill, watch for signs of anything. Sticker had already taken the lead, plot his way down the hill. You think something bad has happened, Sticker? He stopped and turned to Grubba. Something has happened. The group then proceeded to creep their way downwards, casting glances every which way, just in case. Sticker, of course, was the first to reach the edges of this little established town, which was guarded by very large pointy logs. They were all shoved into the ground at an angle, and with the pointy ends of them out towards anyone coming at them. The sight, of course, did not stop Sticker, who merely moved past the gap in the logs and kept moving. Bounce and Grubba and Arms all, however, were a bit more careful as they crossed between the gaps in the logs. They got to the center of town with no trouble, and dropped their baskets of goods. It was a relief, but none of them felt relief, as no one had shown up to greet them. There was an eeriness to this place. Where are they? Shouldn't they all be here since we came into their village? I know and heard that this tribe left early from the spring area to head here, but they aren't around, or if they are, they're in their homes. Something's gone up. Bounce took a step forward and looked about the place a bit more. She cast her glance back at Grubba as he had said this, and then back at the nearby house. All right, we check nearby homes. Bounce and Grubba, you two together. Me and Arms go the other way. The group of four broke into duos from the fire pit that was surrounded by the little huts in the center of this town. Grubba and Bounce heading off to the right, while Arms and Sticker went off to the left. A bit down the row of huts, Bounce had come to a stop in front of one that had a bit of a smell coming out of it. She looked revolted and had backed away, trying her best to cover her nose. Grubba, on the other hand, had gotten a bit closer and did his best not to notice the stench, while noticing that it was there and couldn't be easily waved away. "I'm gonna go in." He said this because he felt like it was the right thing to say in the moment, though why he thought that he couldn't quite figure out other than the thought and the words came to him to say as he plunged in. The hut itself was dark, smelly, and foul. There was figures in the hay and signs that something had gone down, but there were no signs of blood, though some matter was on the ground besides the figures. Grubba had enough of the smell and could only back out because it was overwhelming him. When he got out of the place and took quite a few steps away from the site, he grabbed a few deep breaths of slightly fresher air and helped himself calm down. When he was finally calm, he looked around for Bounce, but she had disappeared, and he felt very, very alone all of a sudden. "Bounce? Arms? Sticker? Are you here?" No one responded, and he found himself walking the small worn path that cut its way between the row of huts. That was much like their own little village. There was many wood-log structures with pelts stretched across them. Then, to top it off, loose ground was padded on top of them to offer that little extra protection. He wandered down the path looking for anyone. "Bounce, are you around here?" She finally poked her head out of one doorway, looking annoyed. "Come in here and be quiet." She went back in, and he took a deep breath and covered his nose as he charged into this hut. He found a small fire in a lit hut, one that showed the interior and some very ill-looking people. Bounce sat down next to one, looking over them as they feebly moved about, trying to grab at Bounce, but the effort was just not enough. Grubba looked over and then moved to try and help one of the men get up, but this only resulted in the face of the man turning green, and so he set him back down before he could let loose on him. "Water. I think they need water." "Will that help?" "It's something, and I don't see any here, so I'll go get some." Using this chance, he left. And before he left, he found a basket of sorts that could hold water. Grubba had scampered out of the hut and down the path towards what looked to be the work section of huts. He was thankful and relieved that he could now breathe a bit more, as the stench didn't seem as bad. Then he went about with his one basket, collecting more baskets and jugs that were hidden under one of the work structures, as if to keep them out of the sun, but let everything easily get to them otherwise. He hurried over to them, looking at these jugs, wondering if there was some secret to them, and then hit the top of them to see what would happen. The lid responded and came off, revealing water in the vase. Surprised and exulted that he didn't have to find the nearest water supply, he let out a yip. Then he went to dip his basket in the water and paused. What if the stuff that caused them to fall down and be like this is this? I mean, they don't look like they were attacked, so something caused this, and I just don't think this is right. And so, just to be on the safe side, he backed away from the water supply and looked around. There was no sign of sickness around this building, but just to be safe, he rushed onward to find some water for his basket. It took him a while to find a source of water that looked and felt okay. He was already feeling exhausted from running around in the late afternoon sun, and having run around and around until he found this little stream of water. Tired from running, he slumped over and let the basket slip down into the stream, collecting some water. Once it was full, he set aside and then plunged his own head in to cool off. After a few good seconds of this, he pulled his head back out and got up and pointed himself back in the direction that he hoped was going to lead him back to town with his basket of water. He took his time getting back to town, not because he was tired. He kept repeating to himself, no, it wasn't his excuse at all. It was all because he wanted to make sure that he didn't spill the basket of water, and having to come back and fetch more water for them. At least, that's what he decided to believe as he ran into Arms, standing at the edge of town, looking sick. "Where have you been?" "Water?" Isn't there some over in that hut? Yes, but I couldn't help but think. Bounce had come rushing over from some hut, looking about for the sound of his voice. She spotted him and threw up her arms. I went to get water from a fresh source. I don't know if I can trust anything in this town. Fine. We need more, though. There are 7 people who need help, and that basket will only help 1 or 2. Grubba felt his shoulders droop at the realization of what this would mean. He was going to have to go back and find the stream again, in the fading light of day. Take arms with you, grab some of the big vases, empty them out if you have to. That should help us enough. She came up and snatched away his basket of water, carefully though, and was off hurrying back towards the people that needed help. Grubba was beginning to look around for another basket or a vase when Arms came up carrying a now empty one. How far? It's a ways away. Arms handed him the vase, and then disappeared again before returning with another one. The two then began trudging their way out of town, hoping that the light would hold down, or that the night light provided by the other round ball in the sky would offer some light depending on its shape. The sun had not cooperated, having vanished and left the night sky that was occupied by the other round object. The moon was casting its melancholy light all over the place, and provided a decent amount of light to allow them to get around on. The babbling noise of the stream could be heard nearby, drawing Grubba and Arms towards it. Hey Grubba, what do you think happened back there? In the town? Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't look like an attack or from another village, but they were hit by something that didn't like them very much, and I'm beginning to suspect it was something in town. Do you think they angered a god? A what? Our god, the creature that put us here and provides for us. I don't know, but I will try and find out what's going on. The stream emerged in front of them, and Arms quickly put the vase in his hands in the water, and it was soon filled. Grubba also copied this as he did. He only half filled his, fearing that it was going to be heavy, and then the look from Arms told him that he should fill it up completely, so he did, and they slowly began their trip back, the now heavy vases. Thankfully, the trip back to town didn't take them long, with Grubba leading the way, and Arms, of course, using his arms to carry the weight. They continually won. The trip took a little while, but didn't take them too long to get back, Grubba doing his best to lead the way with the heavy vase. Arms, on the other hand, of course, didn't seem to be too bothered by this weight, and they made their way back towards town at the best speed that they could muster. They wandered in towards the center of town to find a collection of people gathered. Some were lying on the ground near a fire that was going, Bounce tending to these people on the ground, trying to do what she could. Sticker was patrolling around the perimeter of the center, and soon came across them as they walked closer. A pointy stick soon found its way pointing into their faces. Halt! Oh, it's only you two. Come on in. And where have you been? Grubba held up the vase as best he could, but it was heavy, so it moved maybe an inch. Fetching water. Arms moved with his big vase of water towards Bounce and put it down. She opened it and then grabbed a nearby basket to help get some water to these sick people. She stopped and stared at the other 3 who were just standing there. The jar, a jug of a jar, still in Grubba's hands, though slipping a little bit. What are you 3 doing? Stop standing around and help out. They then began to help out as best they could, getting water to these people, after Grubba, of course, put his vase down and opened it up. They worked for a little while before somebody decided that they should take a break, and all 4 headed off to the side. It was decided that they should limit their contact with the people of the town, or rather, Grubba had decided on this, and remained quiet about such a decision, trying to make sure that he didn't too get sick, because he didn't want to get yelled at by the others. He wandered away after helping for a while and tried to find some place where he could lay down, but the thought that this place may be off by some orders of some god, or something, anything, kept him moving. He wandered the rows of huts, looking about and following the pathway in search of anywhere. He soon found himself outside of town, no, on the edge of town, rather, near where the meaty wooden logs with their pointy ends pointing away from town stood. He leaned against the nearest one to him and slumped over it a second later. Well, it was not terribly comfortable. It wasn't that bad, and decided it would be okay to shut his eyes here for at least a while, even though he'd spent all evening and into the morning helping out. The sun, unfortunately, did not let him sleep long. It got to the midway point of the sky, and then, using its power of heat and glaring brightness, woke him up. Grubba left the edge of town, half asleep and still trying to figure out what had made these people like they were, when he found himself in front of their cook hut. He wondered if this badness was caused by food. It's possible, and there was certainly an odor coming out of the place, but was it the cause? Upon stepping in, he saw that there was plenty of food that didn't look like it had survived. The smell, while terrible, wasn't the worst ever that he'd come across, and it wasn't exactly like the smell from the regular house huts. He prodded his way around, looking for something that looked wrong or off. However, it all looked wrong, and touching any of it sent a fear through him that he'd go down like these villagers had. The green stuff that had always tasted like grass looked like it was in the process of turning brown. The meats had a blackish hue to them, and splotches of white all around. In fact, there were those white splotches all around the place, including on the green stuff that was turning brown. The more he looked around, and the more he saw these white splotches, all on this food that was just laying out there. He took a step backwards, and then fled. He backed up directly into Arms, who'd come wandering around looking for him. Grubba jumped and then spun about to see who it was. "What are you doing, Grubba?" "Trying to solve what happened. What about you?" "Looking around for supplies. It seems like someone was already here and grabbed some stuff or some of the people who were here grabbed their stuff and hightailed it out of here. Well, the food hut here is no good. Do you know where Bounce is?" He pointed off towards the center of the little village, and then headed off on his journey to find other useful things. Grubba, of course, turned and headed towards this village center. The sick people were still in a circle around where the fire had been last night, and Bounce was tending to them, although a little bit lazily, as she seemed half asleep and not totally with it. He came up to her and opened his mouth to talk to tell her that food was needed. She, however, seemed to be only nodding her head and poking occasionally at the fire, and then wandering away and tending towards the other people. So instead, he grabbed her and pulled her gently away from the fire and laid her down nearby. Bounce didn't bother to protest or do anything, as she was soon fast asleep. Confused by this, and fearful that Bounce was falling ill, Grubba rushed off to find either Sticker or Arms to get them to watch over the people and Bounce. Out in a field, he found Sticker and convinced the man to go check over the people to make sure that they were going to be all right. Meanwhile, he'd run off to a nearby field near the woods to grab and gather what resources of food he could. There were a lot of berries, then not much else aside from the grass around this area, and he did his best to collect what he could, knowing that their own meager supply would not last long from their baskets. With his arms laden with these berries, he headed back. Back in town, when he arrived, he was feeling very tired, for the evening was just around the corner, and he hadn't gotten much sleep that night, or that morning, rather. And when he got to the center of town, he found that his companions were all asleep. The sickly people looked about the same as when he'd left, and Grubba quickly checked to make sure that his group were all okay, and then set off to find some place to cook these berries, if they needed cooking. He hadn't decided what he was going to do with them yet. He wandered towards the edge of town and found a spot that was away from the town, but not close enough to the pointy logs that were protecting the town to catch them on fire. Grubba did his best to gather stones and wood and fire and got it going. With the fire soon underway and going quite nicely, he wrapped a slurry of grass, salt, and berries in a leaf and set it near the fire so that it would cook, but not cook. It soon started to smell, but not great. But it would cook quickly and it was food, so it would do. To his surprise, his comrades had woken up and followed the scent of food coming over to him. And when the food was done, he split it up between them as they each gobbled it up, although it didn't seem to go down all that well. Still, it was something, and they were all soon back asleep. Morning rose up very soon and was glaring brightly down on them, each of them having assigned themselves a task. Bounce had gone off to collect some better foods. Arms went off with her to help carry said stuff. Sticker, of course, was going to patrol around town and look for anything that was out of the way. And that left Grubba mostly looking after the sick, though he kept wandering back and forth from the cook hut to the center of town, making sure to check on them the second he heard a moan or two. They were mostly pale, but were drinking water on their own now from the baskets, though they were still lying on the ground mostly. Grubba was wandered into the cook hut after one such retreat back to the center of town to tend to people, and was looking about for signs of things, wondering what happened and if any god would throw down such a curse on this village. His brief look into the place had much the same effect as it had the other day. There was plenty of food that was all there, but it looked like it had been taken over by something else. And he felt like it was all somehow unsafe to touch or try out, as all of the stuff looked too scary, and he abandoned it where it was, and just stood there, looking at it. "Hey, Grubba!" Sticker's voice drew him away from the mess. Upon exiting, he saw Sticker dragging a big pink animal past the cook hut towards the fire pit that had been created last night to cook some stuff. "First time I've seen this type of creature. I couldn't help but stick it with my stick. Took some wrangling, but I got it." He continued to drag the dead animal onward. Having successfully dragged the creature to the new cooking area, Sticker soon vanished, muttering something about finding sharp tools to use on this creature. Grubba figured that this meant that the man was probably going to cut the animal up, and decided not to be around for that, and headed for the townspeople, who would probably be a little easier to look at than an animal getting cut up. Having decided on that, Grubba settled in to help these people where he could. There wasn't much to actually helping them out, as they seemed to be growing stronger and stronger all on their own. That and their need for food had returned. He gave them some berries to keep them going, but also knew that this wasn't going to be enough, nor would grass be enough. He'd fallen ill before, and his old tribe had fed him little but grass to make him get better. He got better, but he wasn't sure how much that was to do with the grass. The sound of grunting and frustration came from the nearby, the new cook area. He turned only to see Sticker coming rushing over. Grubba jumped up and headed after him, concerned that something was wrong. When he caught up, Grubba found the man trying to get something out of his mouth, but he wasn't having any success, and was making an awful hawk noise. Recoiling, Grubba tried not to hear what was going on as best he could. It was making him uncomfortable, and he felt like he needed to make the noise as well. After a few seconds, though, Sticker stopped and he calmed down a bit, although he still looked rather off. "Are you all right, Sticker?" "No, that creature is evil. I've never discovered so many odd things in my life." "Have you ever cut up an animal?" "Course I have, but that thing is different from the other creatures. It's got different parts. Anyway, it just caught me by surprise. I'm going back now. It's okay." With that, Sticker puffed up his chest a bit to make himself look good, and brushed past Grubba, heading back towards the new cook area. With the morning quickly running out, the two were back at the center of town, and were surprised to be joined by Arms, who was carrying some goods back to the little village. "Oh, Grubba, where should we put this stuff? Next to the cook place?" No, place it near there, but not there. We need to keep things separated. Sticker here is working on an animal that he killed to try and get it manageable for us to eat, and, well, we just want to keep things organized." "That's right. I had some success and I needed a break. Grubba came to check on me and, food." Arms eyed Sticker and then shrugged, following Sticker as they headed off towards the new cooking area. Having found the clearing and dropped off what he and Bounce had collected, Arms, as suddenly as he appeared, was gone again to fetch more goods. This was all right with Grubba, as it gave him time alone. Sticker had gone off to deal with the creature once again, but was shortly seen running away again. This time, though, Grubba was busy sorting out what was found, and what he might potentially be able to do with what they had. The 7 recovering people would need more substantial food, and soon, so he needed to pay more attention to them than to Sticker. Having split up a bit of the food and figuring out which one seemed like could be eaten right away, Grubba took to create little piles for each person. When he'd settled that, he ferried the foodstuffs to the sick people in the middle of town, who took it gratefully, but still weren't really talking. He hoped it was a good sign that they were now moving about, and mostly sitting up, although they were moving very, very slowly. He wondered if their language of grunts was different in some way than his, and that was what was causing them to keep silent. Still, since there wasn't much being said at all he could do was give them food and hope that Arms and Bounce would soon return with more, and since it was getting late in the day. When he got back to his piles of food, he found Sticker was sitting by a pile staring at it. He looked unwell and poked at some berries. "What's wrong, Sticker? Are you sick, or did you... This place is cursed by gods." "Not you as well. Arms was saying that our god had caused this problem." "Well, it makes sense. I ripped up that meat into pieces and came across green things that smelled so badly inside. That animal is cursed, and the only thing that I know with that kind of power is a god." To this, Grubba raised his eyebrows, and then decided that perhaps it might be good to check it out for himself to see what was causing so much trouble. A few steps into his journey over to the cooking area, the smell hit him. Carried on to see that this pink creature, this animal, this thing, was all strewn about on the ground. He carefully approached to see what Sticker was talking about. Sure enough, there was some green ooze from some spots on the meat, and a very, very foul smell. It didn't take him long to see why he'd seen the hunter run off so many times. The meat looked fine, other than the green slime, which looked so weird to see. But the thought of a curse and God saying that this place had problems stopped him from trying to pick up and clean the meat from the slime. The sound of footsteps behind him drew his attention to the fact that Sticker had once again joined him. "We should burn this place down, get rid of it to appease them, appease the gods that have been so angry." After saying this, the hunter then went over to the nearby fire area and got a fire going. While this took a little while to get going, and was soon roaring to life, Grubba could only watch as the hunter, Sticker, began transporting the pieces of meat into the flames to burn it. The process of getting rid of the animal took a long time, and Grubba left to go check the sick again and found that Bounce was back in town with Arms. They both looked up as he came towards them. "I heard we have some meat." Well, according to Sticker, that meat has been cursed by a god or gods." "I knew it! This land is bad, and this trip was a bad idea." Bounce looked between them confused. "Did you find anything else out there? Any good foods?" "A fair amount of stuff we've already divvied out, and..." "Well then, what's left for us here in this place?" "Nothing. We should leave at once." "And just leave these people here?" "Have they even begun talking yet?" Arms, who was very much on the defensive, moved towards the fire and keep warm. "I don't know. I could catch grunts here and there, but it was all sounded weird to me." And it was at this point that Sticker came back towards them, with blood all over him and looking rather tired. "What's going on?" "We're talking about when it would be okay to start our journey back home." "Oh, well, as soon as possible. This place is cursed. But we can't just abandon these people." "What do you suggest then, Grubba?" Well, since it's late, we eat some food and then think on the matter and probably sleep on it. They all nodded to this and then set about figuring out which of the piles of food they were going to eat, and then what should be saved for their journey back. Before heading off to sleep, Grubba found himself tending to the last of a very stinky fire, where the burnt remains of the creature that Sticker had killed were. The last thing he wanted was the fire to suddenly get out of hand and for it to spread about the place, though he didn't doubt that both Sticker and Arms would say it was because God wanted it to be this way, and thus it was. He wondered why they were so struck by this belief that this place was cursed, but with the last of the grey red of the fire dying, he let it go. And this, he decided, was a good time to just go find someplace to go and fall asleep. When morning rolled around, he was up and about, having had a decent sleep, though it felt like it had ended way too soon. The four of them had decided to convey to the townspeople what they were about to do. Sticker and Arms were pacing about with their pointy poles, waiting for any of the citizens to come up. We should leave. I don't think we need to tell them. Yes, and out at once. God will be displeased if we stay. These people need our help, and our other gods say that we should help people out. We were sent here by God to help them. We have another god that points us towards fighting those that aren't with our tribe. These people should be fought. All three of them then glanced over towards Grubba, who was leaning against a nearby pointy pole at the edge of town. He was just trying to take it all in and think about it. All of this, they said, was probably true, and though he admitted to himself he hadn't kept up to what gods were who and where they should come into the matter, there was one thing that he knew for sure, and that was that the tribal leader, Mugga, wouldn't be happy no matter what happened. They hadn't traded for any goods, and they still had plenty of salt on them. I say that we talk to these people so that we can find out what they know. Meanwhile, Arms and Bounce will collect more foraging supplies for them today. When the orange ball rises again in the next day, we shall set off for home then. Arms bit his lip and looked at Sticker, who was shaking his head. It sounds a bit troubling, though. I think the gods will be okay with us helping people. Sticker, still shaking his head, started to walk away. As long as we leave soon, I think I can go along with it. With this uneasy agreement, they headed back for the center of town. There they found a much livelier attitude than they had yesterday, as the town folks were most of them now up and about, eating a bit of berries and other food, and generally grunting with one another. As Grubba and company approached, they were greeted by hugs and more grunts. They did their best to accept these and understand what was being said, but it was a different type of grunt, and it was not quite what they were used to. Grubba returned one hug. "Ah, yes, it is nice to be back, and yes, do you understand me?" His words were greeted by a few firm no head shakes. He turned to see if the others were getting anywhere near, but they stayed back, and he started to fear that this was going to be a long day of him being the center of attention and grunts, while the others stayed back and did work. But he was then taken off to the side from the people of his village as his three companions headed off to do their jobs. The villagers had gone to a big hut in a part of town that he had not yet explored. In fact, he realized he hadn't paid much attention to the town at all. It was bigger than the rest of the huts, and he wondered if the tribal leader had been there all along. When they got into this giant hut, he discovered was not a sleeping area, but a storage for goods, all untouched, from furs to dried foods to wood and some other odds and ends. This was definitely a storehouse for goods. No wonder they had a wall of pointy sticks pointing outwards towards any invaders. Any tribe would try and kill for this amount of goods. "You can take some along with your friends, but you must be on your way." The sound of this voice had come from his right, and he realized that he could understand it. He turned gently and looked over. "I'm sorry, what? You couldn't understand us." "Oh, we can and cannot. As a tribe, we have a gift for grunts, but that is all at an end since we need to disappear. What? Why? A curse of animals has been placed upon our tribe. We ate the pink ones, and the ones that go moo. Then we fell sick. God has cursed this area. So we must take what we can and leave, since we are the survivors. The one that had spoken walked out of the establishment like he was no longer there. To this, Grubba found himself alone and looking at the goods that had been left behind. He wandered down the rows and rows of stuff, trying to see what he would need to take with him. After a while of picking and prodding at stuff, he began the busy work of transporting goods from this storage hut to the center of town, and in doing so failed to notice that his 3 companions had come back with goodies and had found that they were watching him intently. Grubba continued as he turned around after his latest drop-off. As he was heading back, Bounce decided to follow him while the other 2 were looking over what he'd brought over. He got back to the front entrance of the big hut, thinking about whether or not wood was really something should be dragged with them as Bounce grabbed his arm. In response to this, Grubba jumped. When he caught himself, and whatever was beating furiously inside of him, he calmed down enough to look over to Bounce, who looked just as shocked. What was that? I don't know. What did you do? Nothing. Great, let's not do nothing again. Agreed. Now, what are you doing? Oh, the people here are leaving soon, so they said we could take some supplies with us. Come in. He rushed inside the big hut. Inside, she stopped and stared at all of the stuff she was seeing. Plenty of the dried foods, woods, and materials were just sitting there. They walked back and forth around the hut, picking up things here and there and then putting them back. The hut was not, in fact, that big, crossing only a few dozen feet, but with the way everything was stacked, it certainly felt big. Wow. And we can only take so much. Why? Well, it's a long trip home. And do you want to carry all of this stuff back? It would take longer than we know to carry it all back. She shook her head no at this, then went over to try and grab a basket that was as tall as her of some brown, round, oval things that Grubba knew that he'd tried before. He, however, didn't know what name they'd been given lately, and could only watch as she tried to pick up the basket. It was, quite obviously, much heavier than she thought it was going to be. Arms can lift this, and then I'll have my favorite food. She put it back down, although she hadn't really moved it that much, and hurried out, looking rather proud of herself for having found her favorite food. She rushed back down to the center of town, grabbed Arms, and then pulled him up and raced back as fast as she could. Grubba had just walked out of the big hut when they saw them coming back up. They were soon past him and inside, and he stood there waiting as Arms emerged from a little while later, struggling to carry the heavy big basket of nuts. Grubba then decided to grab the other side of the basket to offer what little help he could, as they once again began plodding their way back towards where they dropped off their supplies. With muscles straining, the just barely managed to get back to the center, and were just about near the end of their strength, and dropped the basket. Arms took to rubbing his tired arms before disappearing off to do something else. Grubba took the moment to sit down heavily and catch his breath. His stomach grumbled in the form of protest of not having much to eat and relax over the last while. Getting to his feet, he set off in search of some food. They would find some food, and the night would go by quickly, with them asleep, until the morning, which rolled around quite easily. Sticker woke up Grubba before the bright round light had risen into the sky very much. It was just on that edge of getting up. He slowly got up reluctantly, but was soon up and helping sort out the last of the goods that they'd decided to take with them. He cooked some food on a fire pit, so that they would have something to eat on their way back. Though he didn't do much cooking, as he wanted it to keep it quick and fast. As he was doing this, he looked around and saw Bounce coming by. Bounce, have you seen any of the sick people?" She shook her head no, and he looked over at Sticker, who was packing away the last of the goods into his basket. When he realized he was being looked at, he too turned and shook his head no. Curious, Grubba got up and headed out. No matter where Grubba looked among all of the huts and even the storage hut, there were no people aside from him and his friends. It was confusing, as they just disappeared, or had left that night, instead of waiting for the morning. But to leave at night risked running in with monsters, especially in an unknown area. Although they should know the area, but they hadn't known the area and they'd gotten sick, so maybe they didn't. He could only shake his head as he made one last lap around the town, but spotted nothing other than his compatriots, and they were headed for the hills outside of town. Grubba, of course, found himself rushing back to where his small stack of supplies were, grabbing up his basket and the last of the food that he'd cooked. With all of this held in his arms, he headed after his friends, hoping to catch up to them quickly. After all, there were people and monsters who were said to roam the woods looking for people to eat, and he didn't want to be caught up in such things. The group had just managed to make it up to the top of the hill when the early morning sun made its presence fully known, and it was at this time that Grubba finally caught up to his associates. They were actually waiting for him up there, but he hurried up anyway, even as he saw them sitting on top of the hill. As he summited, his friends grabbed up their goods and from their little rest to begin their trek. Grubba, of course, looked back down at the little town. It was much more desolate than it had been a few minutes ago, almost like it had aged and didn't look like it was the once thriving spot. "Come on, Grubba, we're leaving." "I know, Bounce, I know." He turned and followed his friends, with Sticker in the lead as they began the trek homeward. End of episode 3. Thank you for listening.